This is another fine edition of Under the Hood with Timmy. It's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Lanny Barnes Jr.
Junior.
And to quote a good friend of ours, your uncle, if you have a friend in Lanny Jr., you have a friend for life. And I can attest to that. Ever since I've known this cat, we've been buddies. Now, we was talking about the other day, and what year did you start, like, going to the cup races? Was that late 70s, early 80s, maybe?
Oh, with my dad sitting in the stands?
Yeah, but, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll go all the way back there, yeah.
I mean, 77-ish. I believe he took me to Charlotte Motor Speedway in October for my birthday. It was probably the first one, and we fell in love with it. And he was always a Richard Petty fan, and I was a Richard Petty fan in my youth, and we just enjoyed sitting in the stands and going to the races.
And Lanny is from South Gastonia, North Carolina.
Proud of it. Proud to be an Eagle.
And his dad was a truck driver for how many years at Carolina Freight?
Oh my gosh!
And what that would be, Cherryville or Bessemer City?
Oh yeah, Cherryville, Carolina Freight Carriers Corporation out of Cherryville, North Carolina. That was the.
So that, I guess that would be Lanny Senior.
That'd be Lanny Senior, yeah, Mr. Clean.
Oh, is that what they called him? Was his CB handle?
Yep.
Oh, that's perfect. So what did Mom do? I know you told me before, but
Southern Bell Telephone. She had. She was accepted to Western Carolina University.
Catamount.
But instead opted to go to work for Southern Bell right out of high school the next day, and had a long career there. And,
was she part of the telephone pioneers? Would that be the same?
Yeah, she was a pioneer.
Because my father-in-law
sure
was one of those. Yeah.
I'd forgotten about that, but yeah,
there's so many tie-ins with you and I over the years, and I value and cherish my friendship with you. And so we got a lot of acreage to cover on our intertwining events throughout the years. So tell me, I'm gonna go forward with this. So you and I had visited Gene Fulton's place on the way down to Atlanta one day, and Gene's kind of a quiet guy. I mean, I've never had a lot of conversation with him, but we were interested in those old pro mods or whatever the motors he was building. And so Lanny's in there talking to him, and I'll let you continue this.
So, all the guys are like, oohing and ahhing all over all the parks, with old Stacy Hall and a couple other guys that work there. And Gene's like, hey, come here, man. I'm like, yes, sir. He's like, got a driver's license on you? I said, yeah. He said, well, whip it out and throw it up here on the bench. And I threw my driver's license out, and he threw his up there. And I was like, my God, you're Lanny. And that's Lanny Gene Fulton. And it's like, yeah, how about that? That was pretty cool.
So, but the reason why he did all that was because of why?
Well, he said, so do you know where you got your name? And I said, yeah, my mom and dad. He said, no, where did it come from? Where did Lanny come from? You're a junior. And I said, yeah. So I later found out, and it came from the country music singer Lanny Ross. So whatever.
And he's like, we looked it up, and he's some kind of 30s, and it's entertaining. So anyway, I thought that was a beautiful story. So
that's where it came from.
I'm gonna. So let's go back, and I do this a lot. I go back and forth. But in 1970, he would sit there, and after the race, you would go through and visit the pits, and sometimes later on, he would get you introduced. And we didn't go over that, but the story of was it Carl Hill? He was the guy that signed in.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So you're still in the stands. So after the race is over with, and we're thinking either Pearson or the King won the thing.
Yeah.
And so you go busting in the gates, and after it was about an hour after, or was it immediately
That's
after
right.
the race they let folks in?
It's probably sure enough, 45 minutes an hour. Back then all the 18-wheelers or short trucks. It wasn't just a couple 18-wheelers back then, but mostly small trucks with trailers and open trailers, and they'd pull out on pit road, and all the crews are out there tearing the pit equipment apart and loading up, and it was cool to get closer to the cars, so to speak. So, a couple hour and a half later, pit road's clear, and all the teams are starting to pack up and one by one driving off, and here you are, this little kid, 13, maybe 14 years old, hanging on the fence, looking off into the garage, just soaking it up, taking all you can get in. And here comes a race car driver walking down through there, and I guess I was always a little bit quiet, and I was just looking at him. I was happy and content just to be able to see him and be that close to him. And I didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything, and the cat stopped, and he turned around, and he came outside the fence and walked down pit road to me, and he took my sun drop hat off, and he signed it, and he shoved it back on my head. And the best I can recollect, he never spoke a word, and I didn't either. And he walked off. And what that did for me that day was solidify my love for our sport, and it has lasted 40 years of working in our sport, and that's the love that has and passion that's kept me here in it, and that was David Pearson.
I love that story, and I'm just recently, you've told me that, and I knew, because over the years, and not to diminish that, because it's a good story, and I'm going to jump forward here just a little bit, and we'll go back to it. But in 1977, a company had started a fledgling fast food chain of Bojangles. So that's right along the same time. And I know it means nothing, but it's great to tie this stuff in. And it was Bojangles in Charlotte, North Carolina. Yeah. So we're going to come back to that in a second. But so moving forward over the years, you not only, your dad, and maybe you mentioned another friend, because I didn't realize you guys flew to some of the you flew to some of the races, and you guys went all over.
Dad loved it. I mean, he loved it as much as I grew into loving it. And he had Dick Arthur. He owned a convenience store called King Arthur's down in South Gastonia, and Dick went to several races with us out west to Riverside. And
so y'all actually went all the way to Riverside.
Yeah, and I wish I would have actually brought it with me. And I'm sorry, Dad. I had a photo of me and my dad standing on the cliffs right at the end of Route 66. It's probably my favorite picture. It's just been a lifetime of memories, and the cool part to me is they're all flashes. They're all just moments. They're all just fabulous moments, and it's lasted 40 years and going yes. Still. So it's great. We can keep adding to it and love it.
So I graduated in 1980, I think. So you was like a year or two behind me in
83. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so Lanny, how did you meet Rick Newsom?
Oh my gosh!
And I know I'm skipping a lot of stuff, but
no, man, my grandpa loved wrestling. This Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. So I got to go with him, and I say it, I got to. It was a privilege to get to go with him to Charlotte Coliseum a couple times a year to see that show. And we were just about to the Coliseum one Saturday afternoon. I look over to my right, and hey, Pawpaw, turn around here and go back here to this parking lot. And we pull up to this garage, and it's Jeff Handy's Automatic Transmission Shop on Independence Boulevard, right across from the gondola. And we go walking up in there, and it's the number 20, and it's a cup car, and it's Rick Newsom. And it was, I don't know, it was a
that was the Oldsmobile.
Yeah, it was a full body, the big car.
The long wheelbase car.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, I'm like, hey, man, I want to work on these things. I want to learn how to work on race cars.
You were talking to Rick.
Yeah.
And he was there anyone else in there with him?
Not at that time. And
so he was probably like, heck yeah, man, I could use some help.
Yeah, if it's free, it's for me. When can you, anytime. He said, I'll come pick you up if you ain't got a license or whatever. And so from where he lived to where I lived in South Gastonia, Lake Wiley was really not that far away. and he worked out of his daddy's shop in a little community south Charlotte.
Oh, so the car was just there for temporary.
Rick would work out of whatever shop anybody would help him and give him some support. And
Okay.
At that moment, it was Jeff Handy. And
Well, the reason why I bring this up, because I think it does spice your story up for sure. But the interesting thing about Rick Newsom is you helped him take that long wheelbase car in between 80, 81, 82, somewhere in that neighborhood whenever they did it, and you downsized that car, and Rick had two, first, how do I say this? He was the first time to get a sponsor from City Chevrolet in 81 or 2.
Okay.
Would that be? Tell me about that.
It was 81 because that was the big car. The boys at Rick's and all his friends and his brother Jerry that used to, they chopped this car up. They fitted, I believe Mr. Funderburk did the chassis work for him, Carolina race car chassis, David Funderburk's daddy. And they built this car and got this new body back on it. Well, Rick needed some body panels. And he's like, hey, I just talked to City Chevrolet. Go run over there and pick up some body panels and some cylinder head castings. And it's like, okay. So you go over there to City Chevrolet on Independence Boulevard in Charlotte, and you get these parts, and you come back, and he's like, okay, now you're going to take these cylinder heads to Larry Smith at Flow Techniques in Albemarle,
North Carolina. Yeah.
So that was when I first met him. So looking back, I cannot remember any time prior to that I saw a City Chevrolet.
And he had it on the
logo.
back quarter panel at one of the short track races.
Yeah, Richmond maybe is the only one I remember right off. That was the first one. And it was an 81 Monte Carlo that Rick and the boys built right there in his daddy's backyard.
And shortened a long wheelbase car to get there.
Cut her down.
Wow. And then later on, was it the same year when he got the Bojangles sponsor?
You know, that might have been 83. It might have been a couple years later.
But it was the same car.
Yeah. He bought another car from Tommy Ellis. It was a Monte Carlo, a Laughlin chassis, and that was an upgrade to Rick.
Right.
And it was
for
a
sure.
major
And that's what
upgrade.
most people did at the time. They just got new chassis and built their short. Yeah.
And like I said again, Rick would move around to whatever shop he could get support at. So Lytle Buick in Gastonia, they gave him an opportunity and a place to work. And man, I believe it was Roger Bazemore, because we all jokingly called him Mr. Bojangle, because he cut a deal with Bojangles, and as far as I know, that's the first introduction to NASCAR that Bojangles had was with Rick Newsom.
And they've been intertwined with NASCAR since that time.
Amen. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome because Rick, his career was fairly short, really. I mean, okay, not to get into that. I mean, that's a whole other story. So, you mentioned your pawpaw. Is that Pawpaw Coleman?
Yeah.
And he had a T-shirt manufacturer in was it in Gastonia?
Yeah, Mitchell Manufacturing Company in Gastonia. He and his brother Isaac, Uncle Isaac, they had that company, and they made your T-shirts, and they cut the cloth, had it sewed together. He at one time they had 40, 50 women working there. Grandmother worked there, and
so you actually worked there kind of in between in this time period.
Yeah.
And as well as helping somebody, you had a real job and then you helped somebody.
Well, while you're in high school, you do anything to make a buck, and your love for racing was what
Drove you.
kept you going. Trying to make a living and trying to work in the family business was one thing, and I told my grandpa, I said, "Hey, I'm really liking this racing stuff pretty much. Probably want to look into that a little more seriously." And he said, "Well, just learn this business so you can always come back to it, and you want to go racing, And we finally crept up through the years. Graduated from high school '83, and I decided I was going to head on over to Charlotte. I was going to find me a job, and I went.
Now wait a minute. Before you did that,
Yeah.
When did you meet Morgan Shepherd along the way?
Oh man.
And I think you said you helped Jimmy Means a couple times because you were walking through the pits on Saturday or Sunday.
So going back to Dad, you mentioned Carl Hill just a little.
Yeah. I want to get that in.
So as a young man walking up to the, you know, trying to get your license and tickets to get in a race was difficult, and Mr. Hill made it difficult a lot of times because he was just
pulling through the
that was
fat.
his gig, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And Dad said, "Let me walk in there with you." Dad was a mason and a shriner.
Well, but it was after several times of him giving you a fit, right?
Oh, no, he gave me a fit for probably 6 months.
Okay,
you know?
okay.
Because what Dad would do, he'd get me to the racetrack, and pretty much he would go to the stands, and I would go toward the garage, and we had no contact with any other racer other than Rick Newsom. But Rick didn't go to, maybe 5 or 6 shows a year.
That's all he could get done.
Yeah, that's all they had finances to get to. So you wanted to go to other races, and I couldn't go to all the races Rick went to because of school. So you'd walk down pit road, and it'd be like, ain't but 2 people over there. They look like they could use a hand. And, it'd be like, someone like Baxter Price, D.K. Ulrich, Elmo Langley, those type guys.
And one of the other ones was going to need a hand that weekend.
Absolutely. I was standing at the back gate at Wilkesboro when Bruce Hill pulls in there in a dually pickup truck with an open trailer, and he's by himself. Now, he did not make the race that weekend, but that's how these guys used to do this.
It's amazing how you remember all this.
Just
for instance.
Well, it's easy to remember when you were there.
I know, I know. It's your story.
But I gotta add in, from DK's. DK's gave a really good opportunity to work, and the people that worked there for him made that possible. They could have run you off, or they could have accepted you. And Sandy Jones and Whit King, they accepted you. I was third rider in the front seat on the old tow truck, riding up and down the roads, loving it, and that's back. You hate to say it because probably kids today would, probably go ooh, but
it was definitely an adventure.
Well, it's 4 guys to a room. You know what I mean? You packed your own towel, from home to make sure you had one.
Oh yeah.
You got the end of the deal.
So you would go. You lived in Gastonia. You would drive to Conover, North Carolina, because you met Morgan Shepherd, and he allowed you to do what?
Man, Morgan was he was looking for help too. So a lot of these guys that didn't have full-time employees. They were sportsman racers looking for their next cup ride, and he was a very good one. And he was a hot shoe. I mean, Morgan was really good, and the day that he said, "Hey, I want you to come up to my shop. I want you to, check out what I got going on," and gives you a place to learn, and you need to polish up your skills on your pit crew work. That way, more people will want you to work for them, and you can get you a better job.
You'll be a hot commodity.
So he gave me the privilege of using one of his race cars to hit lugs. I mean, just hitting lugs, tire on, tire off. Back and forth. Just make sure you put plenty of anti-seize on it. That's all I'm gonna tell you.